You don't know how good you have it. You didn't grow up back then. You don't know what it was like. You kids have it much easier nowadays and just complain about everything. How many of you have heard that sentence from the older generation or something similar? Essentially stating that today is better than it was during the Troubles, but never couldn't be any further from the fucking truth. I was born in 1998. I didn't grow up with checkpoints or Brits on the streets. I didn't hear bombs go off at night. But I grew up with the stories from the Troubles from my parents. 2 ex-prisoners, my father a blanket man who was also on the No Wash protest in the H blocks. The stories from neighbours, the stories from the murals that are still standing. Neither me or anybody else born post 98 are pretending that they lived through it, but myself and others are living this. When people older than me say that it's better, I understand what they mean, because parents aren't sitting up at night waiting on their child coming home wondering if they've got around the wrong corner just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That kind of fear isn't normal anymore, but there is a different pressure today, a new fear. I grew up being told that if I get educated and I work hard, things would be stable. Most of the people I know did that. Apprenticeships, university, got degrees and training schemes, and still it's 0-hour contracts, agency shifts, short-term posts, and wages that will never match the cost of raising rent. Friends moving away because they can't build a life here. I look around my area and I don't see the peace dividend that people talk about of the older generation. I see food banks busier every year, crying out for help. I see parents skipping meals just so their children can eat. Over 70,000 people needing emergency food parcels in a year is not a society thriving. Plain and simple, that's fucking survival mode. Housing feels impossible. Tens of thousands on waiting lists. Private rent eating half a wage. Corporate landlords and short-term lads taking over streets that used to be full of families, communities. Owning a home is more further away from my generation than it was for the previous. And then there's the mental health crisis in the 6 counties. I've grown up with self-unaliving being a regular part of the conversation. Since I was born, more than 4,500 people have passed away due to self-unaliving. That is more than double the amount of casualties during the whole entire period of the conflict. That is the reality of my generation, of our lives. I and many others have been to more funerals than we should have by our 20s. Lost more friends than we should have by our 20s. Family members. Every estate has lost people. The need for mental health support is so much higher here than the rest of the UK, yet the support is not there. The waiting lists go on and on. Hospitals overwhelmed. Tens of thousands waiting years for treatment. People living in pain for years, and some not even getting to see their treatment because they've passed away by the time the appointment comes up. Stormont collapses and fails as it always does, and nothing changes. Services fall apart. But it's my fucking generation that are being told to be patient, that we don't realise what we have, that it's much better than it was back then. Older generations will talk about how during the conflict there was steady work, factories were operating, there was some sense of structure. I can't compare from experience. What I can see is my generation has inherited precarious work, unaffordable homes, and a level of anxiety that is constant. Neither me or anybody else is trying to romanticize a war we didn't live through. I know it was brutal, but when the older generation insists everything's better just because there's some bombs going off, they're missing and ignoring the quiet crisis that is unfolding around our generation, which statistically, factually, is far worse than the conflict by comparison. The Good Friday Agreement has failed. Stormont has failed. Sinn Féin, DUP, all have failed. For the working class communities, every single day is a struggle. That is the part that doesn't get talked about enough in my generation.